York residents are now being required to adopt more stringent data security safeguards to protect customers' financial and personal information. And here to talk about it this week are Devi Momot, the CEO of Twinstate Technologies and also a cybersecurity expert, and Jaci Kelleher, an attorney with the Stafford Owens law firm in Plattsburgh. Welcome to you both. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
There are new provisions that go into effect this coming weekend. This is New York's SHIELD Act, which is short for the Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security Act, which was signed into effect by the governor last July. And now this new law is going to expand what businesses must do to protect their customers' information. And I'm guessing that a lot of people haven't heard about this, that this is relatively new information that's coming to them. What is this law that was passed last summer, and what exactly is it designed to do?
So in general terms, what the law looks to do is to make employers and custodians of persons' information more secure. Most everything now is digital. Companies hold information on us about our birthdays, our social security numbers, biometric information, answers to security passcodes, questions and things. And all those types of information are considered to be private and unique to that individual, and therefore the custodian of that information should keep it private and secure.
And when you say biometric, that's things like fingerprints and
Correct.
retina scans and things like that.
Yes.
And so up to this point, they've been required to do that, haven't they?
Not by law. So certain states have already implemented such law. Other countries have implemented such privacy laws. But this is the first type of privacy law in New York State across all business sectors. Certain sectors have been held to a certain standard of care, if you will. Healthcare with the HIPAA is a good example. New York State Department of Financial Services has a requirement. The schools just this past year put into place another area of coverage for privacy of student information and teacher information and that sort of thing. But this is the first that's really broad-based across the citizens of New York.
Who does it apply to? All businesses, or are smaller businesses exempt from this?
Well, it applies to all businesses, but there is a different standard. So if you are a business with less than 50 employees or less than $3 million in annual revenue or less than $5 million in assets, if you might meet any of those tests, you have to take reasonable steps based on your business. So my company, we have less than 50 employees, so we're going to meet that test, but our standard for privacy is going to be much higher than the local pizza shop. You know, so you have to do what's reasonable for the type of business you have and the type of information you have. But employers that don't, or companies that don't meet that test, they have to meet a broad range of pretty stringent standards that are new and will require many companies that are not already in one of those regulated businesses that Devi talked about. Those companies probably have some steps they need to take to get into compliance.
So for businesses now, how will this impact them? What type of cost are we talking about? What sort of steps will they have to take to safeguard this information?
Well, that really depends on the type of business, the amount of information that they have to safeguard, the number of locations that they have that they keep this type of information in, the number of third parties that they interact in, because don't forget that as employers, a lot of us use third-party vendors. And if we provide that employee's information to that third-party vendor to do certain types of services with or on behalf of or for, there's also an obligation that we make sure that that information is protected from loss or breach. So it really, I hate to be so vague, but it really does depend on the specifics of the organization.
And what's prompting this? I mean, we talk about cyber attacks. we hear when there's a major cyber attack that attacks a big company, a big store, a big financial institution. But are cyber attacks becoming much more prevalent, and is that at the root of this, that's really becoming a problem?
Absolutely. In my travels and conversations with the FBI and other government agencies, our country is losing, terabytes of data every day, if not more, to foreign entities. And basically, they will gather any information that they can. So they'll find a leak within a security control of an organization, they'll find data, and they'll exfiltrate that data. A lot of times, it's not known to the organization that it's even happening. And that information is used in a various number of ways, can be sold on the dark web for a profit. The information, the credentials, or whatever that information is that they get can be used to exploit or extort funds from people's accounts, from their credit line. It is really widespread. There's a tremendous negative impact on our country financially and security-wise. So there's a lot of interest at the government level, and those small businesses are the ones that are most vulnerable and the ones least likely to detect or recognize when something like that's occurred.
People would probably think, though, the hackers would go after the big guys, the big players, to try to, because they know they've got the finances that they can try to steal. People may be surprised that they would target smaller businesses.
Well, we're easier, right? Smaller business is easier. The larger organizations have been fortifying their defenses for decades, not days. Many small businesses today, we just ran across one this past week that thought they didn't even need a firewall. And that is so rudimentary and basic today, it's hard to even comprehend that somebody would think that. But in actuality, small businesses should be instituting about 110 controls within their environment in order to safeguard their organization and their employees' data. And it's important to do because it preserves the chance that they're going to be in business, right? That they're going to be able to remain in business. A lot of times companies go out of business when information is taken from them. So I'm not a huge believer in regulations, but I do believe that the states are on the right track and bringing additional regulation to this area because it's very important for all of us to pay attention to.
And is New York a leader in this, or is New York one of the first states to do this, or are other states passing similar laws?
New York has come out with the most stringent state tests at this point. California has come out with something similar but different, and unfortunately, because we're not getting something at the national level, we are now starting to see different states piecemealing it. So if a company has a location in New York and a location in California, those locations are going to have two different sets of standards, and probably within the next couple years, you may see the states in between setting up their own kinds of standards, which will just make it more complicated.
And if a business is out of state, if they're not in New York or California, but they do business with New York customers, then they have to adhere to this new law.
The test is an employee in New York. So for that employee in New York, they're going to need to comply.
For employees. So if they're just doing business and getting financial data from someone in New York State, a New York State resident, then they don't necessarily have to adhere to the new law.
That's right.
And Devi, your company, your firm works with businesses all the time to better protect themselves. Were they caught off guard by this? Did they not know that this was coming? I mean, the main part of this law went into effect last July, and then there was a second phase in October. And are they ready for this now, or have many of them been caught off guard?
I think the awareness of this law is very minimal at this point. And that should be concerning because being not aware that the law exists doesn't keep you out of the hot water should something happen. So that's why we're trying to make sure that our clients are aware that it exists, and now, speaking in sessions like this and with different community groups just to try to make folks a little bit more aware. It's been fairly under the radar from what we can tell, but it's very important.
And you mentioned it varies from business to business what you're going to do to help them. But for those businesses, this needs to become a priority. Are local businesses, again, people may think that major financial institutions and others are affected by the cyber attacks, but does it happen to businesses right here in the North Country? Do you have clients that have been victimized by cyber attacks?
Absolutely, and only one has reported. So when we look at the vast number of companies that have an incident, and whether or not that incident turns into a breach of data actually have been exfiltrated from the organization, we've only had one that has reported, and we're talking, hundreds of cases that we're either aware of or involved in throughout our region. And some of them are very significant. Just to do incident response is very significant. So I think that there's a good benefit to practicing good cyber controls and good cyber hygiene, in that not only do you comply with the law, but you're also helping to preserve your organization's survivorship. Because right now, many companies don't survive when something devastating happens. Either their reputation's so badly damaged because they had the confidence of their clients and they lose it, or financially they just can't overcome that impact, that immediate impact.
And I think that tying into that, a lot of companies are starting to get cybersecurity insurance and those types of products. And certainly those products are now going to tie into the state standards. It might not be immediate, but within the next couple years, you'll not get coverage for things if you have not actually adhered to the standards. And they won't tell you that until after you've had an incident.
And if businesses don't comply, are there penalties that they face?
Yes.
I mean, not only the danger of being the victim of a cyber attack, but will the state penalize them?
The state can penalize them. There's three components. There's the policy component of it, there is the physical security, and then there's the cyber security. And at the end, if there are breaches or problems with any of them, there are the notice provisions. So the state wants people to do this. So the state is not going to be out looking for playing a game of gotcha with companies. They want the people to start taking these steps. And there's also the ability, if you do get breached and you've taken the steps, you provide notice to people and let them know, and then they can also look out for their interests, or you may provide them with monitoring. It's recognized that even the best defenses in the world are not necessarily going to prevent every attack. So the penalties are there for if you don't even try. If you don't put the steps in place, if you don't send out the notices, those are the things that are going to get a company in trouble.
It's left up to the businesses to say, we've got to step up and this is what we need to do, and then they potentially reach out to firms like yours for help.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most common occurrence right now, is to reach out, get some guidance, get some assessment of where they're at, and then some advice on how to put controls in place. It's almost impossible today for organizations that are small, medium to be able to really understand and implement what's required to be effective on their own. So frequently our organization and our peers, sometimes folks can reach out to some of the federal government agencies that also have guidelines and recommendations and get some help, but it really needs to be a systematic approach to be effective. And there's no more, as we call them, one-hit wonders, where you can just buy an antivirus or buy a firewall and be protected appropriately. As Jackie said, there's also a physical component to this, and unfortunately, sometimes another situation that we see is, organizations getting broken into, and you wouldn't think it, but picking up a server and just leaving the premise with it. There's a lot of other different aspects too, where people are relying on cloud technology, and even though we entrust our data in the cloud, we as employers are responsible for that data. If we have New York employees' data in that cloud and that cloud gets compromised, whoever has that custodianship of that data, we're responsible as the employer that allowed that to happen under our watch, if you will. So there's a lot of different aspects of data security and privacy, and it's just helpful to reach out and use resources.
I foresee that this will make companies cut down on some of the things that might seem convenient for everybody. Not as many people might have access to their business email on their cell phone or ability to get into computer programs. One of the things that's required is to limit access to people that need access to data. So you can't have a pretty open system where all of your HR information and employee information is just available to anyone. You're going to have to put locks on that and security pieces. So people will grumble that it's not as convenient as it used to be, and
Yep, locks on it, and then auditing so that you know who's gotten to it, when they've gotten to it, so that you can tell if it's gotten into the wrong hands. So a lot of different controls.
So the businesses may grumble a little bit about this. There will be cost, obviously, that go with this, but consumers may also feel it as well. But that is a good thing, in your opinion,
Yes,
that because
absolutely.
right now the way it is far too much of that information out there and exposed, and our consumers at risk.
Right, and a lot of what you're seeing on the consumer products, you know, the Siri, you just talk to it and it turns on, and people have become very casual about the security and the privacy. And so I really think that this is a much needed law to get companies focused on being good custodians of this important information.
And by doing that, they'll be better protecting the consumers.
Absolutely.
And by better protecting the consumers, better protecting their employers, they're also better protecting their organization and are much more likely to be able to withstand a cyber attack of any type. There's better than 50% of successful breaches today are insider threat. So it's not always an external party that creates havoc to an organization. And it can be intentional or unintentional. Some of it is absolutely employees that are looking to benefit from an employer's situation or cause havoc. And so it's good to have these controls in place all the way around.
And in some cases, it could also be employee carelessness, that they
Absolutely.
make mistakes and
Sure.
expose the company and the customers.
Yep. And having these controls in place, as Jackie alluded to earlier, if information does get exfiltrated from the organization or from a cloud app that has employees' information on it, and the state gets involved, having evidence that you've put appropriate controls in place, even if they were defeated, from what we've seen in different court cases and things like that, it puts you on a better footing in a defensive posture.
Is this a step in the right direction, considering that cyber attacks are happening more and more in the U.S.? Is this really a critical step that's needed?
I think it definitely is. Such a high percentage of all the information on every employee is in digital format. There has to be protections around it. It's no longer where you have one file in a file cabinet that contains all your employees' information the way that it was 20 years ago or whatever. And it's time that certain regulations get put into place that protect the employees. I've seen in some of our travels and some of our incident response that we've done where certain folks within the organization require employees to give them their password, right? So they have access to all their information. Information like passwords and security answers and, as I mentioned, biometrics, that's all safeguarded under this. And if people have that within your organization, understanding who has it, what they can do with it, and who's actually monitoring what's being done with it becomes all part and parcel of complying with this requirement.
Are you running into a number of businesses that don't think this is necessary, that they think they've got a handle on all of this?
Yeah, I would say most businesses that we run into think that they have a handle on it, but more the executive levels are really starting to question, do we really have a handle on it? And I would say to those executives, it's very important to understand what is in your environment and how it's being taken care of, and not just entrust that it is being taken care of. There's some serious consequences for not abiding by the regulation, and quite frankly, as I mentioned before, it's important for the business to survive, for executives to really understand what's going on within their environment.
Are you hearing from a number of businesses saying, oh, okay, we know this law is kicking in, or this part of the law is kicking in this weekend, and we need to get going, we need to address that? So are you hearing from businesses?
Not a tremendous amount at all, Tom, not as much as what we would expect that we would hear. And that's troubling, because even though people don't know about it, they're still obligated to know the law and follow the law.
I certainly think this is going to be one of those laws where, as we go out and educate people about it, they'll say, I didn't know about this. Why didn't I know about this? What do I need to do about this? And the other thing that can be a challenge, and Devi is saying that more CEOs are looking at this, but sometimes it's very hard for the people who are doing this work day to day to convince the people they work for that this is important. It's not just a cost, but it's really a core function of the business. So, there'll be some internal sales jobs that need to be done to get the attention sometimes at the top.
Once they take the steps, though, you believe the businesses will be better off, and consumers, individuals, will be better off with this in place?
It's a step in the right direction, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for someone to comply, they're going to have to improve their digital hygiene, and that's not just going to benefit what they're doing, but it's probably going to help them keep all of their customer information more safe and be more up to date in what they should be doing. So ultimately, it'll be an investment, but it should benefit even beyond what's required by the law.
And not to alarm people, but that needs to be done. No, businesses right now are vulnerable.
Correct. Most all are. Even when we go in and we do assessments on businesses that have been doing a fair amount, we'll find new areas that they should tighten up on, some that they might be able to loosen up on a bit, but it's a continual process. It's one thing is definite in the cybersecurity realm, and that is that you have to keep that environment alive and well, and the defenses in place against the most recent adversaries that are attacking our environments.
And that threat isn't going away.
It's never going to go away.
Devi Momot, Jaci Kelleher, thank you very much for taking the time. We
Thank you,
appreciate
Tom.
it.
Thank you, Tom.